We are a small nonprofit team of 3, so each of us wear multiple hats. When we receive grants that have no grant reporting requirements, should we still put one together anyway, given our limited time?
Yes, absolutely. So this is your opportunity to showcase what the organization's about. Like, because somebody's given you money, and so you want to give them something back. They've given you money, you want to show them what you've done. It doesn't, and if there are no grant requirements, that's really an opportunity to return a marketing piece that has some like good content in it. Because the worst grant reports are the ones that are super ticky-tacky technical things where they're asking for specific dollar amounts and stuff. You don't really even have to do that. You just have to show you gave us this money, we spent the money, look at all this awesome stuff. And then you can put pictures in, you can, like, depending on what your nonprofit does, you can throw in all the kids and puppies you want, because this is your opportunity to sort of make this donor who isn't expecting anything, they're not expecting anything back, surprised that you remembered them, that you've acknowledged that you did it. And here's all the good stuff that we did with that donation. I think it's, because it's a grant, it's an easier answer for any donation. You should be able to provide something back that says, with your $30 online donation, here's what we did. Like, anytime you have the opportunity to show a donor, thank you, we got it, we did this with it, I think that's a good thing.
And I echo everything Andy said. And I was just going to say, keep it simple on yourself, because it's not a grant reporting. There's not specific things you have to report back on, or they're asking for things. I mean, certainly you can share what the money did, but have keep it short and sweet, because you do have limited time. I mean, you don't need a lot of reporting. Like, keep it to a 1-pager, a powerful story, a few maybe stats or data points, but here's someone that was helped, thanks to your support. So, and something you can actually use in other places. You probably have done that in other, like I always say, don't reinvent the wheel. If you have some really powerful stories about your mission and action and where the funding for a certain program has gone, and you have like the testimony or the story, like, reuse it, right? And I know that feels kind of probably common sense, but I just think sometimes we get so busy into the moment that we keep recreating instead of saying, what do we already have? Like, do we already have this? And we can just repurpose it slightly for this funder. I actually work with a funder who doesn't require grant reporting, any kind of grant reporting. And what's interesting is they really appreciate it, though, when someone reaches out and just, hey, I just wanted to say thank you, and also wanted to just share with you some of the exciting things going on in our organization, or because of your gift and sort of whatever the funding purpose was, here's what's going on. Like, they love it, and it kind of goes above and beyond, showing that you're not just there with the handout every time you want money.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
All right, so this episode is going to drop the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so maybe this is something to do when you're on the road, on the way, stuck in traffic on the way to Thanksgiving weekend with family or something. It's great. We thank you for taking the time to listen to Stacey and I geek out about nonprofit stuff. We're just going to jump right in today. We've got a whole bunch planned, so here we go. I've been running a very small nonprofit for 4 years now. We have board members, and that's in quotes, but it's really just me and the people who are running the nonprofit with board member titles. But we're not functioning in a traditional way. I've been trying to educate myself, and I now understand that board members are separate from staff and volunteers. I know I need to reform the board by moving current members to staff and recruiting people to be actual board members. Can you break down what board member responsibilities are? I've been running my nonprofit essentially without a board at all, and I have no idea what it should look like or what to expect.
This is such a question that comes from so many organizations are in the same boat, especially as they're newer, younger, right? So I want to just say that one thing to keep in mind, before we dig into the board responsibilities, like I think that one thing you've got to remember is that it depends on, so it doesn't, what you have to do is make sure the roles are like separate. Sometimes when you're new, you have the same person that is having to wear multiple hats. So like an organization that's an all volunteer organization can have someone who is theoretically a board member and they are governing and having to do the governance, like board responsibilities, but they're also, right, they're also like having to wear some of the staff hat because they don't have staff, like, and they're doing operations. That's super typical. And so I guess I just want to make the one distinction for that question, just to make sure, like, it's not always, there's not always the luxury of having people, oh good, here's my volunteers, here's my staff, here's my board. Like when you're new, right? Like when you're a smaller nonprofit, there's not always that luxury. So what you have to do is get crystal clear on people know this is the governance part of our agenda, like where we're thinking about these sort of making sure our fiduciary oversight, and here's some of the staff. Now, don't get me wrong, this can be messy. I love it. If you do have enough pool of people and you want to find differences, I think that actually works better because it just keeps, right, that inherent conflict of interest and not being able to, like, it, but sometimes that can't happen. And so until you do find that happening, just make sure you're at least meeting like the governance role of like actually, what does that look like? Having a budget, having a few basic policies, having, making sure that conflict of interest, we can talk about that, what that looks like. But I don't know, like, Andy, I know we talked about this recently during a recent episode. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, the split between a board and staff in a baby organization sometimes is non-existent because it's the same people doing two different jobs. That's just how it goes because you don't have enough money to pay people, so you kind of need somebody to do the work. I've always thought it was useful to think about a board like in terms of like what the purpose of it is, like why you have to even have one. Because I think we kind of skip past that. It's like, well, you have a board because you got a nonprofit, so you need a board, right? It's like yeah. You just have to have it. And nobody says, well, why? Well, like, because there's no why. You just have to. You can't ask that question. It's impossible. But I think the overall purpose of a board of directors, like the reason it exists is because as a nonprofit, so one of the things that you do when you do your Form 1023 to say, I want to be exempt from income tax for this corporation, which is basically what that thing is. I feel like we're doing something that fits into these tax categories that allows us to be exempt from income tax for the business things that we're doing related to this particular organization. Specifically, when someone gives us money, we want to be able to give them a tax deduction, theoretically, if they make enough money or have enough other deductions, right? We want to be able to give them a tax deduction for the money that they give us, like for some sort of higher purpose. There's some good reason that we're doing this. So what the board in this scenario is supposed to do is to be sort of a proxy for everybody else in the entire United States. So your job as a board, like the sort of meta level top beyond any of the actual responsibility piece, is you're supposed to be able to sort of disconnect your brain from the day-to-day operations of the organization and say, if I were somebody just in the world that were thinking about this particular mission, like, is this what we should be doing? Are we on the right track? Are we spending our donors' money effectively? Are we spending the lost revenue of the United States effectively? Because that's the only reason the IRS cares, is because by not giving money up the tax chain, you're taking it from the federal government. So am I spending the federal government's money effectively to do this sort of mission-related thing? So that's okay to be able to do that and be a staff member at the same time. There's no disconnect there. It's not like you have to be a totally disinterested third party because it's useful for you to know more about what the organization does. Like if you don't know anything at all, like if you just talk to your uncle about like, hey, we're doing this thing, what do you think? He'd be like, I don't know. Like I have no information. I can't help you. Like my uncle specifically would be very confused. But so having that like you don't have to be disinterested and lost. You can know a lot about it, which is why it's okay for board and staff to intersect, especially in these baby organizations. I think the reason you want a split later on between board and staff is because eventually the roles diverge, where once you could take away some of those day-to-day activities, then you can put new board members in that have different, they're good at other things. They're good at meeting other people in the community, or having a name that people recognize, or having access to funds, or can have a good oversight in a particular specific area that your nonprofit needs. And doesn't need to specifically know like how QuickBooks works, right? Which is, you kind of need to know at the beginning levels. You need to know these technical details, right? So you can slowly sort of split that out into specializations later on once you grow, but it's not necessarily at the beginning. You don't have to do it that way at the beginning.
I also think when you think about board member responsibilities, so there's some things you absolutely like, again, legal sort of things that you want to protect the organization and your board members. So legal fiduciary duties, that doesn't matter what size an organization is, all of them need to meet these, right? So you hear about kind of these terms: duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. Duty of care, in a nutshell, right? Making sure that you are making informed decisions, that you're doing your due diligence. Your board members are actually preparing, looking at board materials before a board meeting, asking questions, right? So you're caring for the organization as if it, on behalf of that public, the general public, and asking the important questions, and doing your homework, and making just smart, educated decisions. So there's that. You got duty of loyalty. That's kind of the conflict of interest piece. Is, how do we avoid any potential financial conflict of, like a board member gaining personal benefit financially, or their immediate family gaining personal benefit. There's other layers to that, but that's it in a nutshell. And then, right, duty of obedience. Are you following your bylaws? Are you like making sure you're keeping true to your mission and things are in line with your mission? No mission creep, right? Are you enforcing, are you making sure that you're adhering to any laws that exist around the sector? So sort of that obedience piece. So you've got those regardless of any size of a board or any stage of development. And then there's kind of like this idea of sort of these four overarching pillars, that I like to call them, that I think are important but look different depending on the size of the organization. So I want to say this, but say it in a caveat, that I think this is where you get to sort of an organization that's a baby organization, or a smaller, younger nonprofit, is going to look different with these big four overarching principles than someone that's a more sophisticated, mature organization. So you've got like this established kind of organizational identity and strategic direction, right? So where are we headed? And oftentimes, anyway, there's a lot of episodes where we talk about how involved the board should be in strategic planning, but the idea is just directionally, where are we headed? Do we have a mission, vision, values that guide some of our decision making? So that very high level macro. So boards generally do that. But I'll tell you, just as an example, like a really small nonprofit, the board is probably that doesn't have staff or doesn't have many staff. Sometimes the board is also a little more sometimes in the weeds of how are we going to, the how, right? Whereas the how we're going to deliver on our goals that we've set for ourselves, versus a more sophisticated organization that is, the staff is really thinking through a lot of that. So again, that's where like the nuance in this comes in. But so you got set the identity and strategic direction, ensuring adequate resources. So, that has to do with everything to do with, where are we going to get our revenue from? How are we going to make sure that we have the right staff, or how do we get revenue to get staff? How do we make sure we've got the right board members? Basically, like adequate resources to run. You've got provide oversight, right? So there's that sort of core anchor. And again, that can look more macro or micro depending on size, but yeah, is there a budget that's approved? Is there do we have insurance for board members? Do we have that Form 990? There's a whole list of these kinds of things. And then like building a strong board is that fourth anchor. Like, how does the board make sure it's strong and working well, and just like a united unit, and has things like board recruitment policies or board orientation, that kind of thing. So So that's a very like quick, cursory, very like nuts and bolts. There's so many resources out there to more detail about some of these. I'm certainly happy to put, one or two kind of resources, put them in the show notes and make sure you can refer to that or give you a couple links. But that kind of, I think that answers it. Hopefully, I don't know, Andy, anything I missed that you want to add?
No, I think go into the show notes and finding everything you're going to put in there is the trick, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And as you hear from all these things, like sometimes it's as much as it's straightforward. What are the board's rules? But as you heard, like the second, other than that fiduciary piece, like there's other core, like 4 roles and sort of board member roles and responsibilities can look a little different depending on size. And that's the thing I guess I just want you to take with you. You still need to make sure things are done. But when you don't have staff or you only have maybe 1 or 2 staff, it can just look different. So just keep that in your back pocket moving forward.
Our nonprofit is planning its first ever annual gala next year, and we're curious to know if it would be appropriate to have an MC and auctioneer be the same person. This would help us save money and be easier to find one person versus 2. We live in a smaller community without much of this talent available.
So I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I'm not going to get into the whole, are you sure you want to do a gala? Because we've done that before, right? So I'm going to assume this path is moving forward. So, right? I'm not going to try to sway you against it, but yes, go listen to some other podcast episodes if you want to hear that. No, sorry to be anti-gala. No, that galas have a place. So it's a different skill set, right? At the end of the day, I mean, maybe there is this magic unicorn, but it's also just sort of different. Like, what is the purpose for each? And, I look at kind of an MC, right, is trying to connect and sort of entertain the audience in one way and sort of keep the flow going with timing and stuff. So that's hard to do. But so like to do that and then have the auctioneer hat, I've not ever seen that done. So maybe someone has, but I see it as 2 very different kind of skill sets and deliverables. And also I think they can play off of each other well if you do it the right way. Like, I don't know, like sometimes the MC and the auctioneer can kind of be a good sweet spot. So given that you come from a smaller community, I don't know, that's probably not what you want to hear. And maybe someone has another solution and knows that magical unicorn that can do both. But also thinking about, I have seen, and this is only, the only advice I'd give on this is because I've seen this happen in person or like in my own life. So my husband belongs to a very tiny or he did for a while. He was on the board of a really tiny organization. And it wasn't that the community was small, but they didn't have the budget, right, to hire somebody the way, like to hire a professional auctioneer and professional MC. So they sort of talked about it, bantered about it on their board. And one person who's kind of the one that everyone loves and is kind of the one that everyone connects with, they were like, why don't you do the MC work? And then they had him do the auctioneering. Now, this is very like kind of like grassroots style, right? So this is not necessarily going to get you the biggest bucks, but it had a real hometown feel for it. And they kind of joked about it at the beginning saying, hey, we're trying to raise a few bucks for a good cause. We didn't want to put our money toward like getting professionals because our hearts are in this. And so we're going to do this. And so they did it and they did fine with it. And it was just, but it was it wasn't about like the goal wasn't about, it was about trying to make a few bucks, but not like a ton of bucks and trying to stretch everyone like for every last dollar you can get out of them. Right. So I think it kind of goes back to, what are you trying to accomplish with it as well? But it can be done in a very sort of like if there aren't the people and you have somebody else who, is just kind of a beloved or kind of maybe it's even a beloved local community member, not even on your board or tied to your organization, but the one, right, the person on the news or the person, whatever, locally that everyone knows that, sometimes you see mayors of small towns. I don't know how small a town or community we're talking about here, but there's ways to kind of have fun with it and still kind of give it the prestige you're looking for. So, but separate is my vote.
I think this question is actually trying to bait us.
Do you?
I do. Because so Stacey, you're like just the sweetest. Like answering this question with like the best intentions at heart to be able to try to give the best answer. Because
like, is the sweetest like a condescending?
No,
like, okay,
not at all. Not at all.
You're kind of being naive
not
and
at
silly,
all.
Stacey.
Not at all. I was sort of in awe of your ability to like think the best of this scenario and come up with something that's would legitimately be like an actual answer that if someone really truly wanted to know this, that's what the answer is. But I think it's a trap. I think I think it's intentionally written to make my head explode because and again, Stacey and I aren't the audience. We're absolutely not the right audience to answer this question even a little bit because both of us find galas to be excruciating. And there's nothing that I think I find more unpleasant than having to listen to the local weatherman MC something because people recognize his face and because he does this on the side for a little bit of cash because the weather business isn't that great nowadays. And then you've got somebody who fancies themselves a professional a professional auctioneer of charitable things who does. I mean, I don't even understand the idea behind this. There's like we've gone into this. I mean, here's why I'm reacting this way is we're confused about what the point of charitable giving is. And we've given in to this need to have an exchange transaction take place because you're afraid to talk about your mission in the way it needs to be talked about. That if your nonprofit has a good enough idea and you're doing a good enough job to actually solve this social issue, and there are people that are interested enough in this social issue to show up somewhere, why are you pretending all of a sudden that your nonprofit is terrible and that nobody really wants to fund this and what they really want is a terrible party with free booze and somebody yelling at me to be able to pay for their unused timeshare in wherever? I mean, we need to be prouder as a nonprofit sector to be able to say what we're doing is worthwhile. We're serious about this particular social issue. We're serious about this particular cause. And so we want to get people that are also serious about this to help us do this. We want partners in our journey. We don't want drunk attorneys that want to go to Cabo for cheap. That's not the strategy. And so I know I still think the question was written as bait to get me angry, and it worked. I took the bait, and here I go.
Andy.
Right? So don't do a gala. Don't do a gala. Have a serious conversation with your board about like what is it we're trying to achieve here? Is it to make? Are we not very good at fundraising? Maybe we can talk to folks about how do we get better at fundraising because we've defaulted back to what the easiest possible thing in the world is. It's a gala, it's a golf tournament. And so all the accoutrement that comes along with the gala and the golf tournament, we need to throw in as well. We need the silent auction, we need the live auction, we need the auctioneer, we need the weather guy. Like, it's just lazy. It's just lazy. And this work is too serious to be lazy about it. So let's not be lazy about it. Did I take the bait too hard, Stacey?
I love your passion around it. And I also am really pushing myself and want to push us to think about when there. So I think it goes back to sort of the gala thing. Yes, to everything Andy said. But I also think back to when we've talked about it before, if there's a larger strategy, and not all galas I've been to some good galas. You've been to, I don't know, Andy, I'm not going to speak for you, but
I've
I've been
never
to
been
some
to a
good
good gala.
ones.
I've never been.
You've never been to a good gala.
No.
I've been to some good ones, and it's where I feel the mission front and center throughout. It teaches me something else new, and it connects me to a community of like-minded people because it's more than just a money grab. It's a larger strategy. So from that angle, I think if there's a way you create whatever you want to call it, maybe it's not a gala, whatever, you call something where it's like people. I always use this thing that Seth Godin, for those who follow him, says. He says, people like us do things like this. And so, like, whatever that looks like. So what are the people that are in your, kind of your circle, your network? Like, what are people like those wanting to do? What are the things like that they want to do? And what are the things that like resonate with them? And so and for some people, maybe that is a gala. For others, it's just like, gosh, we want to, old school hoedown barbecue in like our town, whatever, like, I don't know. And so it's a way to congregate, come together and to celebrate. And so I feel like I don't know enough. So I get everything, Andy, you're saying. I also go, I don't know if I know enough. I don't want to carte blanche, just say it's a crappy idea until like I knew more about the town, the culture, the dynamics, the are there a lot of these kinds of things? What is, and it's not about, and trying to figure out is it truly about a sense? Sometimes these things are about a sense of community. It's like, instead of like, we want to create a sense of community and celebrate like what we're doing and help you be a part of celebrating with us and looking toward the future. Like, so I guess it's like, it goes back to being like, it's not a ticket to not talk about our missions in real ways. It's not a ticket to fundraise in a way that it's just a one night, quote, a one night stand because we just want the money that night, because we know that's not sustainable. And I think you and I both agree with that. But I go like, what is this key? What does this look like? You're right. Like, what are we trying to accomplish? And then the how of how we do it. Let's like throw it against the wall. How do we do something different or make the event feel different so that it doesn't have that like, that sort of burden that Andy referred to that comes with events. I don't know. I'm looking at Andy's face, folks, as I'm saying this. I haven't convinced him, but I'm not trying to say that I think all galas should be done. I agree with a lot of what Andy said. I also I feel like I don't know enough about this person who asked this question. I want to know more. I want to know more about why they landed on a gala, what else they've done, right? This is one of those questions where it leads me to, how did we get here? Was it just because that's what everyone else does? And if that's the case, that's the wrong answer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think buying a hat and a pair of boots doesn't make you a cowboy, right? So let's not pretend we're a cowboy. So the work is too important, in my opinion, too important to leave to dilettantes. That if you're just going to come in and dabble, I mean, you may do a little bit of good, but you're also wasting a lot of people's time. So if you're serious about it, then absolutely, you should have a strategy. There should be a full development strategy. And if gala is part of your full development strategy, then these questions answer themselves, because this is how much money I'm willing to spend because this is what our return is. And if we need this amount of money, we know that in order to get it, we're going to need the weather guy and a professional charity auctioneer, whatever the heck that is. If you need those things because it's part of your strategy, you've already answered your question, right? So I think that's yeah. I don't know. Maybe my blood sugar's low.
Can I ask, though, a really simple question? Forget about the gala for a minute. Have you ever seen, like, I'm curious to know, have you seen an auctioneer and MC be one and the same, just out of just practical curiosity?
No, never. Anytime there's an auction, I mean, it doesn't, a lot of times it is just some random dude, right? It's not a pro, whatever that would be. It's just somebody has been given that job because they can make weird noises with their mouth.
I am a staff of one, and sometimes I'm signing off to approve an expense I incurred for the agency, and then I sign off on the check. I feel as if this is a conflict, but we don't have enough administrative staff to have more separation. Is this okay to do when you're just one person?
Yeah, this is great. This is kind of what's considered an internal control question. And as you get bigger and you have to get a financial audit and maybe you need to get a single audit, your auditors are going to start asking questions about how do we know that you're just not writing checks for nothing, that you're just like, oh, I was hungry, so I wrote myself a check. So there needs to be some way that you can prove to an auditor that like the expenses are authorized or that you're not just making things up as you go along. And the good news is that a nonprofit, we already start to do this from the beginning, because even if we're teeny with a staff of one, I'm going to bet you have a budget. I'm going to bet you have a board of directors, or at least, it might be the staff, but they're acting as a board of directors. So this is where you kind of have to mash all those things together to come up with something that can be reasonably considered internal control, which means that you need to have like two people that can be able to sort of sign off on each other's things. So what happens is nonprofits tend to get really like complicated about this. And I would never recommend like putting in, if the expense is under this amount of money, it goes this way. If the expense is over this amount of money, do this thing. I mean, inevitably, every nonprofit that I ever start to work with, they're like, well, if the check's over $50,000, we need to go find a board member so they can countersign the check. And it's all these complicated rules that are trying to be internal controls, but are really just like way over the top. And then they end up hamstringing the organization. So you want to do the thing that's like the least minimally invasive, that actually can sort of prove that you're not just like paying yourself for no reason. So in your scenario, if you're a staff of one, you probably have a board member. So what you'll need to do is either have the board member periodically just kind of go through things with you. Like, so here's all the things, and I'm going to show you everything we spent the money on, and this is what went out. And can you look at all these things and maybe sign off on them that you've checked it? As you grow, you'll probably want to have a little bit more separation. So the big holes are things like not necessarily spending money, because that's easy to track. It's receiving money that's a lot harder to track. So if somebody sends you physical checks, you need to have like two people together opening the envelope, right? So that you can see that like a check for $10,000 came in and it went into our account. And it wasn't a check for $10,000 came in, we erased who it was to, and I put it in my private account, right? So you need to have, it's more revenue specific than it is expense specific. But just having people kind of check each other's work, especially if you're really tiny, just have folks check each other's work. Maybe somebody else does the bank reconciliation every once in a while so that they can double check that things aren't, going wrong. Just think about those kinds of things as if you were, an external observer trying to say, like, how do I know that they're doing it right? Don't design something really complicated. I would totally not do that. Thanks again for joining us today. Stacey and I really appreciate that you've taken the time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the podcast. Remember to send us those questions. The email address is questions@nonprofiteverything.com. You can also find us in about 2,700 different ways. The nonprofiteverything.com webpage does have a list of former episodes, all 165 of them. There's a topic index if there's something specific you're interested in. It also has resources that go along with certain episodes. So if we talk about something in an episode, we put a link there in the show notes as well. Enjoy your holiday weekend, and we will see you in 2 weeks.